I honestly think that I would just encourage, almost the way that my parents had encouraged me, I would encourage them just to continue to go after your passions, that you can achieve anything if you work hard.
He was one of the most recognizable faces on HGTV, a tall, charming twin who helped millions of Americans turn crumbling houses into dream homes every week. But behind the spotless renovations, there were allegedly cracks forming that the cameras never picked up. What really happened to Drew Scott from Property Brothers? Was it a network fallout, a secret health battle, or something far more personal that changed everything? Join us as we tell the truth behind a story that is more complicated than anyone expected. From small-town Canada to America's favorite network. Drew and his identical twin brother, Jonathan, had a very strong bond because they both wanted the same things in life and worked hard to achieve them. Their father worked as a farmer, and their mother was a teacher. Together, they raised their 5 children to appreciate the importance of hard work and dedication. Since the family did not receive anything without putting in effort, the brothers learned from a young age how to take care of themselves and handle challenges on their own. Drew got into acting first, landing small roles in Canadian television through his teenage years, and he had a natural presence, the kind that makes cameras want to linger on a face. But acting work came and went, so somewhere along the way, the brothers figured out that real estate could give them what acting could not, which was a steady income and something concrete to show for their time. Drew got his license in his early 20s. Jonathan put his energy into contracting and design, and together they started flipping properties in Vancouver, buying distressed homes, renovating them, and selling them for a profit. It was exhausting, unglamorous work, but it was theirs. The idea came straight out of what they were already doing. One twin finds the houses, the other fixes them, and together they help real buyers through one of the more stressful things a person can do. HGTV picked up Property Brothers in 2011, and neither of them really knew what they were stepping into. The show debuted quietly, but within a year, it was one of the highest-rated programs on the network. Viewers responded to their chemistry, their humor, and the fact that they visibly liked each other, which sounds like a small thing, but is actually quite rare on television. By 2013, they were everywhere. HGTV spun the format into variations, and the Scott brothers became the faces of a whole era of renovation television. Drew especially became a household name, partly because of his smile, and partly because he could walk excited buyers through difficult decisions without ever making them feel foolish for wanting something impractical. It looked effortless, and for a while, it was. However, the complex system that made everything seem so easy was working quickly, and not everything happening behind the scenes was going well. The machine behind the magic. What most viewers didn't fully grasp was that Property Brothers was never really just a show. It was a franchise, and by 2015, Drew and Jonathan had built Scott Brothers Entertainment around it, a production company running multiple HGTV shows at the same time. Drew wasn't only the person on screen. He was a producer, a business partner, and a public face whose image had commercial value completely separate from anything he did on camera. That kind of operation needs constant attention, and the pressure it generated was, by most accounts, enormous. The schedule alone was punishing. During peak years, Drew was allegedly working close to 100 hours a week, juggling episodes across multiple series, appearances, business relationships, and the kind of social media presence networks now quietly expect. People close to the production said the pace never really let up, because there was always another episode to shoot, another deal to close, and another press obligation sitting right behind it. The charm you saw on screen was real, but it existed alongside an exhaustion that only a handful of people around him ever actually got to see. creative tensions surfaced too. Insiders suggest Drew and Jonathan didn't always agree on where the brand was going, and expanding into so many parallel projects at once created friction about what actually came first. Some of that was ordinary sibling friction, the kind you'd expect from two brothers running a business together, but some of it reportedly went deeper than that, touching on what kind of work they actually wanted to be doing versus what their contracts and the network were asking of them. These were two people who had built everything on doing things their own way, so the constraints of long-term television agreements chafed, and not always in ways you'd notice from the outside. Commercial success was undeniable, but it has a way of creating obligations that outlast the energy behind it. Drew Scott had become a brand, and brands have shareholders who want them to keep doing exactly what worked before, not what might work next, or what the person at the center of it actually wants to do. The question of what Drew wanted, separate from what the machine around him needed, was one that would eventually become impossible to set aside. His health scare prompted him to reflect deeply on his work, personal life, and the things that truly matter to him. This experience might be the reason he started to change the way he approaches fame and his television career. The health scare that changed his priorities. In 2018, Drew Scott publicly revealed something that had been worrying him for months. He announced that he had been diagnosed with a varicocele, a condition involving enlarged veins in the testicles that can affect fertility, and that he and his wife, Linda Fan, had been working with doctors to address it as they tried to start a family. The disclosure was striking not just for its personal nature, but for what it said about Drew's changing relationship with privacy. This was a man who had spent years presenting a curated version of himself on television. And here he was talking openly about a medical condition that touched on something most men rarely discuss publicly. Drew had surgery to fix a medical issue that was affecting his ability to have children. He was very open about how hard the recovery was and the emotional stress of dealing with fertility problems while maintaining a busy career. Even though he and Linda had a massive, high-profile wedding in Italy in 2018, they chose to share their private struggles with the public rather than hiding them. This move showed a major change in Drew's personality. He stopped trying to act like his life was perfect and started being more honest with the world, even when the truth was uncomfortable. Doctors who didn't treat Drew personally pointed out that while his condition was fixable, the stress of working too hard can make it much harder to heal from surgery. To recover, Drew started doing less work, which was the first clear sign that he couldn't keep going at such a fast pace forever. People working with him noticed he was starting to rethink his priorities, though the full impact of those changes wouldn't be obvious until much later. The health scare reportedly accelerated conversations between Drew and the network about what his involvement with Property Brothers would actually look like going forward. Those conversations were cordial by most accounts, but they marked the start of a period in which the working relationship between Drew and HGTV would begin, quietly, to shift. The filming continued, and the audience numbers remained high, but Drew had started to feel differently about what he was ready to sacrifice for the show. And this new perspective was leading him in a clear direction. Linda Fan and the marriage that reshuffled everything. Long before their big wedding in Italy, Drew Scott and Linda Fan dealt with the challenge of building a relationship while Drew was becoming famous. They met in 2010 before Property Brothers ever aired, while Linda was working in event planning. Drew said that meeting her felt special right away, and by the time his show became a huge hit, they were already in a serious relationship. Linda didn't disappear into Drew's shadow, and that mattered more than it might seem. She built her own professional identity, took on producing roles within Scott Brothers Entertainment, and became a visible part of Drew's public life in a way that felt like actual partnership rather than something a publicist arranged. When they launched a podcast together called At Home with Linda and Drew, it was framed as a lifestyle and home improvement show, but it worked as something more personal than that. A space where they could talk about life together without a renovation schedule shaping every conversation. People who watched the relationship closely noted that Linda's influence on Drew's priorities was real and significant. By multiple accounts, she pushed back on the idea that work had to come before everything else, and her own experience in the industry gave her the standing to make that argument in ways Drew couldn't easily wave off. When they started seriously trying to have children, the question of what kind of life they actually wanted to be living stopped being abstract. It became urgent, and it had a deadline attached to it. In 2022, Drew and Linda shared that they were expecting their first child through a surrogate. Their son, Parker James Scott, was born later that year, and becoming a father completely changed Drew's priorities. This change seemed to surprise the people he worked with, as the TV network was used to Drew always being available and never saying no. Once he had a son, he was no longer willing to give up his personal time for work, which reportedly made things difficult for the production team. Becoming a father made Drew care more about his family and less about always saying yes to work, which caused some tension at the network. Could his new priorities have contributed to the contract problems they had with HGTV? The HGTV contract dispute nobody talked about. Talent contracts in the entertainment industry are rarely simple. And for someone at Drew Scott's level, they're genuinely complicated documents. By the mid-20s, Drew and Jonathan had become two of the most valuable personalities on HGTV's roster, and their contracts reflected that, binding them to obligations that were extensive and detailed in equal measure. When those contracts came up for renewal and renegotiation in the late 20s, multiple industry sources alleged the discussions were far more contentious than anything the network's public messaging let on. The core of the tension, allegedly, was creative control. Drew and Jonathan had built Scott Brothers Entertainment for a reason. They wanted to own what they created, not just appear in it. So when it came to the Property Brothers IP, its format, its spin-offs, and its future licensing, neither side moved quickly toward giving ground. HGTV had spent years promoting the brothers' brand, and the brothers had spent those same years building their identities into it, so both had something real to protect. That left the two sides in a standoff, though you wouldn't have known it from the outside, because publicly, it was all framed as ongoing conversations. There were also concerns about where HGTV wanted to take the franchise. The network was reportedly pushing for formats that Drew and Jonathan felt had drifted from what made the original show work. Reality television had changed a lot since 2011, and there was pressure to add more drama, more conflict, and more of the staged emotional beats that kept audiences watching on streaming and social platforms. Drew, by multiple accounts, pushed back on that. His position was that the show's authenticity was the thing people actually came for, and that trading it away for higher short-term engagement would cost them more in the long run than it gained. The dispute never became a public falling out. Both sides kept the cordial front the industry expects in these situations, and from the outside, it looked like business as usual. But the pace of new Property Brothers content slowed noticeably in the early 20s, and while everyone pointed to the pandemic, people inside the production knew the slowdown had as much to do with unresolved negotiations as it did with any logistical disruption. The relationship between Drew Scott and HGTV stayed intact, but it had quietly shifted into something more cautious on both sides. Even though everything looked normal on the outside, the slowdown in new Property Brothers episodes showed that things were changing behind the scenes. Could this quieter, more cautious relationship with HGTV have given Drew the space to explore his own creative projects, like music and advocacy? the pivot nobody saw coming. While the television work was getting more complicated, Drew Scott was building a parallel career that most of his HGTV audience knew nothing about. He had been moving deeper into entertainment and media ventures that had nothing to do with home renovation, music especially, because Drew had always been a musician and not in a casual way. He played guitar seriously, had been writing songs for years, and had worked with artists and producers in ways that barely registered in public because none of it fit the contractor with a great smile image that made him commercially valuable in the first place. In 2022, Drew put out original music using his own name, and it was a big statement. He wasn't just a TV star trying a new hobby. He had creative interests that went beyond what his fans expected. He was ready to follow these interests, even if it puzzled those who only knew him from Saturday morning renovation shows. The music received some attention and real praise from critics, and when Drew spoke about it in interviews, his excitement was clearly different from how he talked about his TV work. It was obvious that he felt more alive when discussing his music. He also worked on his public speaking and charity efforts, mainly helping young people start their own businesses and get better access to housing. This wasn't just a celebrity pretending to care. People who worked with him said he truly cared about housing costs and had learned about the issue. The Drew Scott who took part in these talks was more serious than the one you see on TV, and he spoke more openly about the difference between these two parts of himself. Drew Scott's recent growth was about discovering who he is on his own, apart from his brother Jonathan Scott, who plays a big role in their brand together. Although they built something great as a team, sharing a brand means that some of Drew's public image is linked to his brother. Drew was trying to figure out what being himself really means, and his interest in music and helping others was part of that process. He was still in the middle of figuring it all out. Drew's journey shows how he has been figuring out who he is outside of the brand he shares with his brother, exploring music, advocacy, and fatherhood as parts of that process. Could this slower, more thoughtful approach to life and work be the reason he now engages with his career and public life on his own terms? Where Drew Scott stands today. By 2024 and into 2025, Drew Scott had settled into a version of public life that looked different from the peak Property Brothers years, but that was also, by his own account, more deliberate and more satisfying. He was still involved with Property Brothers content, but the frenzied pace of the franchise's expansion had given way to something more selective. He and Jonathan still appeared together and still had the chemistry that made the show work in the first place, but the machine around them had been scaled to fit what they actually wanted to give it, not what it could theoretically extract from them. Fatherhood continued to reshape his schedule and his priorities in ways that were hard to miss. Drew talked openly in interviews about wanting to be present in the way his own parents had managed despite demanding lives, and about how specifically difficult that is when your profession routinely asks you to be somewhere other than home. Those conversations never sounded like complaints. They sounded like someone who had made a choice and was living with it consciously, which is a different thing entirely from someone who stumbled into a reasonable work-life balance by accident. Drew had not faced any serious health issues since his late 20s, and he talked about staying healthy with a new awareness that comes after a scare, that shows you that your body has limits. He kept his social media presence but changed how he used it compared to his busiest years, sharing less promotional content and more personal stories, showing that he valued real connections over just having a large audience. The question of what really happened to Drew Scott doesn't have a single dramatic answer. There wasn't a big scandal or a sudden collapse. Instead, it was a slower, more human change. After the initial excitement of being famous wore off, Drew simply began to figure out who he really was and what he actually wanted from his life. It was a gradual process of moving away from a public image and toward a life that felt more manageable and real. So, what really happened to Drew Scott? Was it the health scare, the contract tensions, the pull of fatherhood, or just a man deciding that the machine he had helped build did not get to run him forever? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.